Please welcome back to the stage Skift founder and CEO, Rafat Ali.
Thanks. Okay, so Brian, I don't have the clicker, by the way. If somebody can hand me the clicker. So we're coming to the end of our event. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, I guess they're advancing the slides. So this you will see what I'm talking about comes back to our megatrends. So bear with me while I take a sort of a longer route to the megatrends that we've written. So I'm turning 50 in about 3.5 months from now. Lots on my mind in terms of how I've lived my life, how I want to live my life for the rest of my life. And it just so happens that I'm reading these 2 books right now. I usually read 2 books at a time, so I'm sort of going between, depending on the mood or etc. I go between 2 books. This is how I read. I read on Kindle. I don't read physical books. I read Kindle. Kindle launched in 2007. I think the first week it launched is when I 100% converted to Kindle. So I'm happy to have that conversation at some point and have not gone back. Brian, do I need the clicker? Okay. So there are 2 books, and it's reflected in the megatrends. So the first one on the right-hand side that you'll see is this demographer Paul Moreland that talks about, he's written a bunch of books, and what does the demographic future of the world look like? If you've seen me speak in the last, 6 months, I've talked a lot about demographic changes that are happening in the world. We've started to talk quite a bit about on that on Skift as well. The idea being that the world is getting older, that the fertility rates in the world have dropped. I'm gonna have some slides on that a little later. And the second one is sort of a more personal read, if you will, on this guy. He's a Yemeni Canadian author who's written this book about why when people move, for instance, I moved from India to here, at some point they go back to their countries and what's the emotions that they go through as they do it. The subtext being they're searching for the connection that they've lost if they've moved to different parts of the world. And the way that I sort of think about this is these are like 4 big topics that are on my mind as I'm thinking about the world. Demographics and how it's changing. I mentioned the future of work. One of the things that I think when we talk about the future of travel, one of the biggest things staring in our face that we miss is that the future of travel is whatever the future of work is going to be. Meaning how we work determines how we live, it determines what we earn, it determines the leisure time that we have, that then determines how we travel. And so the thing that we at Skift watch quite a bit, the thing that I pay attention to is the future of work, meaning these tools that have certainly accelerated in the last 3-4 years with Zoom, et cetera, coming in, is just the start of how our work life is changing. AI has a direct effect. I feel like AI, we talk a lot here, we talked over the last 3 hours as well, 2 hours. AI's most lowest hanging fruit today is changing our working habits. I think this is obvious now with all the new tools that are going to come in. I'll come to the loneliness crisis in a minute, but when we talk about climate change, how I think about it is climate adaptation, sort of an evolution of climate change, which is climate change is here. We can't dial back the clock. So how is the world going to adapt to the changes that are happening? We talked about it in travel, which is the shoulder seasons are becoming more busier. The season is now summer travel is changing as well. I've read a few books on where will people move to in the next few decades as certain parts of the world become uninhabitable. There's a book that came out called Move from this author happens to be a friend of mine, Parag Khanna. He did this research on by 2050, what's the most popular and the best, so actually, what's the best place in the US to move to based on all the climate changes that are happening in the US? And you guess what state that would be? And Michigan. So based on the climate change and it being a colder state in general, and obviously California burning, and who knows, New York will be underwater, whatever else will happen. So climate adaptation. If you look at a country like India, which we've talked about and will continue to talk about as a country, many parts of India by 2050 will be uninhabitable if this pace continues. And so what does that mean for travel? And so these are big things that are on my mind, and many of these are reflected in these 12 megatrends that we have today, that we launched today at Skift, including the one here, this sort of a catchy juxtaposition of robotics versus demographics. And robotics for us in this context doesn't mean robots itself, but means AI in general. So one of the big battles that everybody's trying to figure out is, as the world ages and labor issues become one of the biggest things. For instance, if you look at a country like Japan, country that is probably at the forefront of the world that is older in general. What role does tech and AI play in the case where they have labor shortage? And it's playing out today in a country like Japan, South Korea, which I don't know if you know this fact, but South Korea is now the country with the least fertility rate in the world. It's 0.8. And so in general, the replacement rate for a country, meaning for them to have steady population, is 2.1. And US is now 1.6 or something at this point. South Korea is half of that. So you can imagine a people that is going to high school in Korea now, there'll be half of the kids available to go when the next generation comes in, which is just an incredible thought if you think about it. So this battle of will labor win out versus AI, the battle is already won. It's going to be AI that's going to win because there's just not enough people. So we're thinking too short term if we're thinking that will this get people out of jobs? Well, there won't be enough people to do jobs. So AI will have to come in. So this is what this megatrend talks about. One of the other megatrends that we talk about is demographics. I can't read the thing, I need my glasses for it, but the robot, this is what we're talking about. So this is a clip that Ipsos CEO just wrote this book, I'm going to say a couple of years ago, where he goes through, this is a excerpt from one of his presentations that he gave, this long presentation on YouTube, which is a fascinating presentation, in which he talks about what it means for the world where there are fewer people in the next few decades. So it's a short clip, I think about 2 minutes. If we can play this, do I have to click it? Okay.
We will grow fewer, which means that there's going to be a global population bust. We're going to reach somewhere between 8 and 9 billion. I don't know exactly what the number is going to be. It's somewhere between 2050 and 2060, and then we're going to start the decline. And we will end the century with a population size like it is today or somewhat smaller. Now, these numbers could be off given the acceleration that we're seeing in terms of declining fertility. So the peak could be lower, it could happen faster, and the decline could be more precipitous. As we say in the book, it's not good, it's not bad, but it's important. The growth in our population today in most countries is a product of population aging. In other words, people not dying as fast as they used to, but also from immigration. Without immigration, the United States and places like Canada, their population would not be growing today at the rate that it's growing. We're going to see a dramatic shift in population structure. We're going to be older with diminishing fertility in smaller families. By the way, in both Canada and the United States today, the most common household is a person living by themselves at the start of their adult life and at the end of their adult life. I think we have to start paying a lot more attention to the power of older women. Why? They're very community engaged. There's a lot of them. They vote. And they're going to have a lot of economic and political power going forward. Somebody's going to figure that out at some point. The world is becoming metropolitan. The human species is becoming metropolitan. And the countryside is emptying out. We're going to see the decline of China. We're going to see the rise of India. And we're especially going to see the rise of Africa. the only part of the world that still has surplus population and still has much higher than average birth rates. But the truth is, even in places like Africa, fertility is declining. The question is just how fast. All of this, I think anybody who's concerned about the environment and climate change, if you believe that the activity of human beings is what's causing all the problems with our climate, then fewer human beings is probably going to be seen as a good thing. It's probably going to be easier for our oceans. It's probably going to be easier for food production. It's going to be easier for a lot of things relative to the environment, but it's going to create big challenges for the economy. Something that an economist at Stanford called the empty planet result, which is that the economy is going to have an incredibly hard time growing, because the fastest and biggest growing and biggest part of our population is the least consumptive part, which is the elderly part. And we're going to have trouble with innovation, because innovation tends to be a young person's game.
So, so that was to give you the last part. I will disagree with only because I'm turning 50, and he says that older people cannot be more innovative, which I'm going to disagree with. But other than that part, and by the way, I feel like there's so many business opportunities on spurring innovation in people who are older. One of the other stats in the rise of Africa that I read recently is that in the next 25 years, so this is 2024, how many of you remember what you were doing in the millennium in 2000? Probably a bunch of you, or the young, at least us among the older people. So 25 years from now, my point is 25 years from now is not that far away. We still remember what happened in the millennia. It feels like it was not that long ago. In 2050, by 2050, so another 25 or odd years away, 1 in 3 young people in the world will be African. 1 in 4 people overall in the world will be African. Do you know what that means for the future of the world? Has anybody thought about it? What does it mean for the culture, how people, how world economies go? For now, Africa's role on the world stage is probably less than what it deserves, but in another 25 years, it will be right there. Is the travel industry ready for it? And so that's some of the, that's why I'm so obsessed with demographics, from personally as just somebody who's interested in it, but also how that intersects with every other thing that you look at in the world. Once you start paying attention to demographics, pretty much every other issue in the world, you start looking through a lens of demographics. Another stat, the book that I showed you first, there's some stat that any country whose the majority of the population is above 40 has the least number of wars in general. Meaning as the world grows older, I know we're sitting in the midst of 2 wars happening that all of us are worried about. As the world grows older, there's a hope that people will fight less. Because just as you grow older, in general, if there are more older people, they don't fight after, or they don't have the same energy to fight, if you will. So anyway, these are some big thoughts. Probably I'm going too high on this. But I'll sort of end with this thought that by 2050, people in many countries, 65 and above is the fastest growing demographic in the world today, certainly in the US. In certain parts of East Asia and Europe, 65 and above will be 40% of the population, which is double what it is in Florida today. And if you think Florida as a state in the US that we know is structured for people of a certain age, can you imagine if you're double that number of people? So again, in the travel industry, are we thinking about products for people that are older? And in general, how will the industry cope with all these fascinating changes that are happening in the world? So these are the 12 megatrends that we have. I hope you read it. I hope you share it. People online, thank you. Oh, I do have one more, but I'm gonna skip this one, just because there's. I already talked too much about demography, but I know a bunch of it was talked about loneliness crisis, and I feel like there's connections between demographic changes happening in the world. I just read the guy talked about the most common household in America is a person living alone. I was just reading the census stuff last night. Is that there's been a dramatic increase in people living alone in the U.S. in the last few years, and it's now 30% of all U.S. population is and this is the highest it's ever been, and it's only growing. In 1940, that was about 8%. So you can imagine that that number is only increasing. So the role of the travel industry, I know Catalina talked about it on stage, the role of the travel industry in fostering community is not just a buzzword, but it's a reality that the industry has to figure out. Again, thank you to the speakers. Just had a great insights from all of them. And thank you to our sponsors as well. And as I mentioned, if you heard a lot about the future of the world is India. If you want to figure out India, that's the conference to go to. And then Global Forum is coming up in September. And that's it. Thank you, folks. Thank you for tuning in.